Let me recap where we've been for like the last 5 times we've been in here. I've been working on a whole series here called Breaking Bad Habits. Each week, I give you a different key to self-control, a different major key. And so every week has been going through a different major key. And I want to recap those real quick. I'm going to give you the last big one tonight. Number 1 was that purpose drives self-control. If you have a purpose to where you're going, what kind of person you want to be, what kind of change you want to make in your life, you visualize that. Purpose, if your self-control was a car, purpose would be like the steering wheel. It steers it, okay? Then we talked about delayed gratification. Saying no to now is saying yes to later. Does anyone remember that? That's whenever, if you can say no to something you want really bad right this minute, you're saying yes to something better in the future. We talked about daily accountability, or this is what I called streaks, okay? You won't become who you're not in the process of becoming. That means every day, what are you doing to inch yourself closer to the person that you want to be? And then, I think this was last week, we talked about willpower, okay? Willpower fuels self-control. It would be the fuel of the car. But what we talked about last week, and we looked at Jesus in the garden with his disciples. Actually, you missed a good one, Brady, because it was all Undertale themed. So, that was the one for Brady.
I was not here.
And you were not here. But what we learned about was that willpower is a limited resource. You can use up your willpower. You could use it up early in the day. And then you don't have any left by the nighttime. And that's when people can make bad decisions a lot. So, willpower has to be managed. And we talked about different ways to manage it. Okay? You got to get a good night's sleep. But then we talked about things from the Bible where it talked about prayer, where it talked about fleeing temptation, because temptation will just wear you down. We talked about changing your environment. So we talked about all those things last week. I want to give you the next big key tonight. That next big key, eliminate decisions. Okay? And actually, I've been thinking, I think this one might actually be the thing that helps me the most in having self-control is eliminating decisions. So I want to tell you tonight about the psychology behind this idea, and then I want to show you where this appears in the Bible and where God shows us how much easier it will make our lives when we can eliminate decisions. Now, what do I mean when I say eliminate decisions? Willpower, like I was saying, is limited. We don't have unlimited amounts of willpower. There's different things that can sap our willpower. When we have to make decisions, if you have to make a big decision, that takes a chunk out of your willpower for the day. And even whenever you make tiny little decisions, all these decisions we got to make all the time, those are also slowly eating away at how much willpower you have. Even the tiny little decisions like, what am I going to wear today? What am I going to eat for lunch? You go to the store, you look, or the restaurant, you look at the menu and you have to pick out something to eat. Things like that actually chip away at your daily reserves of willpower. And researchers call this decision fatigue. They say, after you've been making decisions all day, once you get to the end of the day, 1 of 2 things is going to happen. Either 1, you're going to start making very careless choices, or they say 2, you'll just kind of vegetable out and you'll just go with the flow of anything. You'll just kind of stop making decisions. You just kind of shut down. So sometimes, have you ever woke up in the morning and you're like, why did I do that stupid thing yesterday? Why did I do that dumb thing last night? Do you ever wake up and have that feeling? Probably it's because, maybe at the end of the day, you had been making so many decisions that by the end of the day, you were wore down and you had kind of lost your self-control by the end of the day. There was an interesting example of this I saw over in the nation of Israel. And do you guys know what a parole board is? Like when someone's in prison or they've been in prison for a while, sometimes they can get out early on parole if they've had good behavior. Does anyone know about this concept? Yeah. So what you do is you go before a parole board and they ask you questions and they decide if you can get out early on parole. So there was this, wasn't really a study, they were just observing what was going on. And in Israel, they had a parole board. And one of the things they found was that in the first part of the day, the parole board would let the prisoner off on parole. They would let him out early 70% of the time. But then whenever prisoners came before them in the later part of the day, they only let the prisoners out on parole 10% of the time. It went way, way down. And they're like, what is causing this? And they just kind of looked into it and they found out They just learned when you've been making decisions all day long, big decisions, like whether to let someone out on parole, they just kept getting wore down. So by the end of the day, they're just like, he can stay in jail. They just didn't even try anymore. They just kind of went with the flow. Decisions can wear you down. Decisions sap away your willpower. So that was something kind of interesting. I thought, what are our decision depleters? What are the things that suck it out for us? Big ones for us. It can be things like shopping, resisting temptation, trying to change behavior, aka breaking bad habits. Those are all different things that can cause us to sap away our willpower on making decisions all the time. I was reading a book last year. It was called Triggers. It's by a guy named Marshall Goldsmith. And he said he has learned that making decisions totally saps his willpower for the day. So to make his brain operate at peak performance, he has taken almost all the decisions out of his day. He said he wears the exact same clothes every single day. Every day, and the same clothes in his closet. Because he doesn't even want to have to make that decision. He just knows it's just something that's just going to wear him down a little bit. All these little decisions we make are a little bit at a time. He sounds kind of like a cartoon character. They're always wearing the exact same clothes every episode. And that's what he says he does to keep his brain operating at peak performance so he can make decisions about things that really matter. So the main idea tonight, and I will show you, I think this is one of the biggest keys to actually having good self-control and making good choices in your life. Decide before you have to. And I'll explain what this means. Because a few years ago, I got tired of always having to decide on Sunday morning. I have these Sunday morning clothes in my Sunday morning closet. And every Sunday morning I would go in there and I would try to decide what I'm going to wear that week for church. and I got tired of making that decision. So I learned this from one of the church ladies, what she does, and I just copy this. Every single Sunday morning, I take off the nice clothes that are on the left side of the closet rack. And I wear those. And then when I'm taking them off at the end of Sunday, I put them over on the right side of the closet rack. So every Sunday, I just take whatever's on the left side. I don't even have to make the decision. I just take whatever's on the left. And when I take it off at the end of the day, I would hang it up on the right side. So my clothes are always every 2 or 3 months, all my clothes cycle through. And actually, it's made my Sunday mornings so much more pleasant. I don't have to make that decision right off the bat first thing in the morning every day. So what have I done? I have eliminated decisions for myself. By making a decision one time, I have eliminated all those other potential decisions I'd have to make down the road because I've already got it taken care of and covered. You can do that with little decisions like what you wear every day, but did you know you can also do that with big decisions in your life too? And there's a story in the Bible that illustrates this very well. It's about a man named Daniel. And when I say he's a man, he was a teenager actually, a Jewish teenager. So he's not quite a man yet probably. But you know what? He operated with a lot of integrity. He was a very manly young guy. And what he did was he got kidnapped by these people called the Babylonians. Him and some of his Jewish friends, they got kidnapped and taken away to Babylon and their king, which was King Nebuchadnezzar. And they just did some horrible things to Daniel and his friends. Okay? They enrolled Daniel and his friends in this academy to teach them how to be Babylonians. They said, we don't want you to act Jewish anymore. We want you to act like Babylonians. Daniel lost his home. He lost his family. He lost all his friends. He even got turned, and if you don't know what it is, I'm not going to explain it right now. He got turned into a eunuch. That's what they did to him at this place. So they did terrible, terrible things to Daniel. They even changed his name. They changed his name to Belteshazzar. And they did all these horrible things to him. Let me read you a little bit of his story. It's in Daniel. It's actually on the back of your bulletins, but you can read up here. The king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans, which was the Babylonians. So they took some of these best-looking Jewish boys that they kidnapped, made them into eunuchs, and said, you're going to be slaves of the king. You're going to have to learn our language, learn our customs, and you're not supposed to be Jewish anymore. You have to be Babylonian. And Daniel did not have a choice in any of these matters. These things were just happening to him against his will. And he couldn't even control what they called him. They changed his own name. There was only one thing he actually could decide, and that was what he could eat, because they were bringing the food before him, And he said, I am not allowed to eat that food. And I'm not sure what his reason was. It might be that it was sacrificed to idols. It might have gone against like Jewish dietary rules. We're not really sure what was wrong with the food. But he said, hey, I can't control, you changed my name, you kidnapped me, you bring me to this place. He couldn't control the circumstances. But one thing that he could control, he said, I cannot eat that food. It would be wrong for me to eat that food. He said, I'm not going to eat that food. And here's what happened next. The king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, 3 years training for them, so that at the end of the time they might serve before the king. Now among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Those are some of his friends. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel, and this is the key verse, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. The key phrase there, when they brought this food before him, Daniel purposed in his heart that he was not going to eat this food. He purposed in his heart. That means he had already decided beforehand, before they even brought that food to him, he had purposed in his heart, he had predetermined, I'm not going to touch it. I am not going to eat that food. He had already decided beforehand that there was nothing that was going to tempt him to eat that food, because he had purposed in his heart so that he wasn't even tempted by the meat. For so many temptations that we struggle with, we could avoid the struggle entirely if what we would do is decide before we have to. Decide up front, I am not going to do that thing. I'm going to decide just once up front that I'm just not going there. Deciding first, not having to wrestle with the decision later, but just deciding now before you really have to make a hard decision. You have to decide up front what you're going to do in a situation before you actually get in that situation where you're tempted to do it. Like Daniel, he decided up front, I'm not going to eat that meat when they bring it to me. He had already purposed in his heart. So I want to tell you tonight about how to decide before you have to. I'll give an example for me. I'm never tempted with drugs. I've never been tempted with drugs. Because I've decided this my whole life, if someone ever offered me drugs, I just would not take them. I would just be like, that just, not even something I think about. Not even something I just consider or toy around with in my head. I don't have to, if someone were to offer me some kind of drug, I don't have to weigh the pros and cons, okay? I don't have to get into some kind of factual argument with them about whether it'd be a good idea. I don't have to create some kind of case against it. The decision's already been made. So it's something that's, now I know not for me, what's a temptation for me isn't going to be a temptation for you, and what's a temptation for you may not be a temptation for me. Here's why that's not a temptation for me, because I already decided up front. I decided before I ever had to decide. It just wasn't something I was going to do. When I was dating before I was married, I had already decided up front that I wasn't going to have sex before I got married. Like I had already decided that. So I didn't really have to be tempted with that so much. Like when I was going to go out on a date, the idea of having sex that night was just not something I even thought about. It wasn't something I considered. So it wasn't a very strong temptation for me to just be able to wait, because I'd already decided beforehand. I had just already made the decision. It just wasn't even out there as an option to weigh. Decide before you have to. Don't decide things in the moment, because when you decide things in the moment, you are much more likely to make the wrong decision. When you have to decide right in the moment, you can do something really bad. So decide before the moment comes. Decide what you're going to do. Decide the person that you're going to be. Decide before you have to. I'll give you one more example. Sometimes when I'm like, I haven't been out to a workout at the gym for a few days. And I think, well, you know what I'll do? I'll just go to bed and I'll wake up in the morning. And if I feel like getting up and going to the gym, I'll go ahead and do it. And if not, then I just won't. So I decide to wait and decide in the morning. Well, what do you think is going to happen in the morning when I wake up in my bed and I'm in those, comfortable sheets, comfortable pillow, laying there? Do you think I'm going to decide to go to the gym? Of course not. I don't want to get out of the comfy bed and drive across town and lift the heavy weights. I don't want to do that. So how do I defeat that? How do I defeat that hindrance? I just decide the night before. I just decide, hey, I'm going to get up tomorrow and go to the gym. I just already made the decision. So when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to lay there and think, do I really want to go to the gym? No, I've already decided. I'm just going to go ahead and go to the gym. That's something that works for me. Decide before you have to. So if you make the right decision early on, then you just make that decision. You just live with it then. Okay? I've talked sometimes about trying to eat healthy. I talk sometimes about that. How do I avoid sitting around at home eating unhealthy food all day? Like ice cream. Well, and the boys could tell you this. How do I decide not to sit at home eating ice cream all day? When I'm at the store, I just don't buy it at the store. What?
You try so hard to not buy it. There's so many stories about that.
So I decide at the store not to buy the ding-dongs, okay? Now, if I bought the ding-dongs, then I would just go home and I would pass by those ding-dongs in the closet, the cabinet, 100 times a day. Eventually, I'm going to pull out a ding-dong and go ahead and just get that. So how do I avoid that temptation? I just decide at the store that I'm not going to buy them. And then I don't have to have them sitting in my cabinet all day long, wearing down my willpower. I just decide before I have to. Decisions will sap your willpower. Like last week, do you remember that I was talking about fleeing temptation? One way to do that is that you just make it up in your mind before you even get in a situation. You just decide up front how you're going to respond. You just make the decision right then, and then you just live with it. You've already made it ahead of time. If you want to have more willpower in your life, what you got to do is just eliminate as many decisions from your life as you can. Make the right decision early on, and then just stick with that. One last verse for you today, 2 Corinthians 6:2. I want you to think about these words before we go. And Emily, if you want to come on up, go ahead. 2 Corinthians 6:2, it says, "Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation." The most important decision you're ever going to make is your decision whether or not to follow Christ. But here's the great thing about that decision. When you make that decision about whether or not to follow Christ, you can eliminate so many other decisions from your life. You don't have to decide if you're going to go out and drink with your friends because you say, I have already decided to follow Jesus. You don't have to decide whether, you don't have to sit around and decide, do I need to go to church on Wednesday night? You've already decided to follow Jesus, so you already know the answer. You don't have to decide whether or not you should forgive this person who hurt you because you've already decided to follow Jesus. You don't have to decide whether or not, should I say this word? You don't have to decide that because you've already decided to follow Jesus. If you've already made that decision to follow Jesus, then you can really weed out a lot of decisions that could come up and try to tempt you throughout your life. Because you say, hey, I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. I'm not doing what those people are doing. I have decided already that I'm going to follow Jesus. Take that decision very seriously. That's the decision that's going to guide your whole life. That's the ultimate thing that you need to decide before you have to.